1. The Information Superhighway. When the internet looked like a destination, not a process. The prediction, what we thought. At the end of the 20th century, the phrase information superhighway was shorthand for a belief that was as much emotional as technological, that the world was about to become radically more connected, more informed, and more equitable because of digital networks. Popularized in speeches by Al Gore in 1993 to 1994, the term framed the internet not as a niche innovation but as infrastructure comparable to the interstate highway system, something that would fundamentally reorganize society. In this view, information would flow as freely and predictably as cars on a freeway. Knowledge would be democratized, and barriers imposed by geography or class would diminish. By 1999, this idea had leaked out of policy circles and into everyday conversation. The expectation wasn't just that the technology existed, it was that it would shape how people lived, learned, worked, and connected. Why this prediction made sense at the time? To grasp why the information superhighway felt inevitable, you have to picture the world before iPhones and smartphones, before broadband was ubiquitous, and sometimes even before home computers were common. In 1999, only about half of U.S. households owned a personal computer. A DataQuest survey noted that around 43% of American homes had a PC by early 1999, a significant rise from earlier in the decade, but nowhere near the saturation we take for granted today. Mobile phones had begun to spread, but they were rudimentary compared with today's devices. They were primarily used for voice calls and simple text messaging, far from the internet-connected multi-purpose computers people carry now. Surveys show that cell phone ownership was increasing, but only about half of U.S. adults had one around 2000. In many countries outside the U.S. and Western Europe, personal computers and internet access were still rare entirely. Even internet access itself was optional rather than default. Dial-up connections were slow, often expensive, and required a basic level of technical setup just to log on. Broadband was not yet mainstream. Many people accessed the internet at universities, workplaces, or a friend's home, not everywhere you went as we expect today. And yet what was visible, email, websites, early e-commerce, bulletin boards, and simple file sharing, hinted at profound change. Even a small slice of connectivity transformed how people communicated and imagined the future. This was not people fantasizing in a vacuum. It was historical pattern recognition. People saw computing and connectivity grow, and they projected that growth forward. Combined with the emotional atmosphere of 1999, a global celebration of a new millennium, optimism about digital networks felt not just plausible but necessary. It fit the mood of a world that believed the future was within reach, and that radical connectedness could solve old problems. Who said it, and where? While the internet itself was a technical project long before 1999, the information superhighway turned it into a narrative. Vice President Al Gore used the term repeatedly in speeches and policy platforms as early as 1993 and 1994, advocating for government investment in digital infrastructure. Later, corporate leaders and tech journalists embraced the phrase as shorthand for a world rewired by connectivity. Magazines like Wired and major newspapers ran stories treating the internet as the central infrastructure for the next century. Business strategy documents, lobby groups, and even elementary school textbooks began using the term. It was everywhere, not because every prediction was precise, but because the idea resonated culturally. What actually happened 2000 to 2025? By 2025, what people meant by the information superhighway existed, but far differently than they envisioned in 1999. Connectivity did become foundational. The internet became the central medium for communication, commerce, entertainment, and civic life. Education, business, government, media, social networks, and almost every institution moved online. Words like Facebook, Google, YouTube, Instagram, WhatsApp, and TikTok became household vocabulary, platforms unimaginable in 1999. Yet the form it took was not a single superhighway with predictable lanes and open access for all. Instead, the internet evolved into a fragmented ecosystem of platforms controlled by powerful private companies. Connectivity became personal and mobile, enabled by smartphones after the mid-2000s, device that did not exist in 1999 but is now central to daily life. The early promise of a neutral democratic network coexisted with new problems. Data privacy concerns, misinformation networks, algorithmic amplification, digital divides, and powerful corporate gatekeepers. In 1999, most people weren't yet connected everywhere they went. By the 2010s and especially the 2020s, internet access was nearly universal in rich countries, and mobile connectivity expanded rapidly globally. What the information superhighway envisioned in metaphors became multi-layered digital reality, but with institutions, incentives, and behavioral patterns that the early forecast did not fully anticipate. Verdict. Status. Realized. The core of the information superhighway prediction really did come true. The world became connected in ways that reshape everyday life. Access to information expanded dramatically. Digital networks undergird how we work, socialize, shop, and govern. The internet became a backbone of the 21st century world in a way that would have seemed astonishing to anyone in 1999. Emphasizing realization rather than partial acceptance helps keep the emotional weight intact. This prediction didn't just happen, it dominated the century's trajectory. Why this prediction was realized? The prediction succeeded because it was anchored in real, observable momentum. Even before 1999, connectivity was spreading across universities and workplaces. Early adopters were already experimenting with email, forums, and e-commerce. Costs for computing and access were falling rapidly. Those structural dynamics were real, and they scaled over the 2000s and 2010s, creating a world that now takes connectivity for granted. What people in 1999 failed to see clearly was how that connectivity would be shaped by platforms, algorithms, incentives, and business models that emerged later, and how everyday experience would become inseparable from mobile, personalized networks, rather than just a broad public highway. But importantly, at its core, the prediction was fulfilled. Information did become central, ubiquitous, and transformative. What this prediction teaches us about the future. This prediction reveals a pattern that repeats throughout this book. People can foresee direction quite accurately, that something transformative is coming even when they misjudge form and consequences. In 1999, people trusted that connectivity would matter because it already had visible effects. They just did not foresee how deeply it would penetrate daily life, or how swiftly technologies like smartphones would accelerate that penetration. The lesson is instructive for future forecasting. Identifying the vector of change is one thing. Understanding how human behavior, business incentives, and societal structures shape that change is something else entirely. One-sentence takeaway. The information superhighway was realized not as a single open road, but as the tangled, powerful digital network that now defines daily life in 2026.